Alright, I thought that I would do another video, something a little different from what I've done so far with the Jabberslide project. This is actually a project that I started before I started working on the Jabberslide, and I sidelined this one so that I could get started on Jabberslide. And the Jabberslide has taken, a lot longer than I wanted it to, which is really my own fault. And so I suppose I've gotten a bit impatient, and I wanted to get back to this project. So I'm just doing this video just to introduce the project. I'm not going to be doing any on-camera sculpting, but also I wanted to introduce people to sculpting putty. I know there's a lot of people out there who already use it and know about it, but I've been sculpting for years before I found this stuff. And actually, I've only been using it for, I don't know, maybe a year and a half or so now. And the reason why I started using it was because it was recommended to me by a friend who does tabletop wargaming, for example Warhammer. And he recommended it because he uses it with his wargame miniatures. So I started experimenting with it, and at the time I was sort of delving into the realm of sculpting miniatures for games like Warhammer, and this stuff worked. For sculpting on that scale, it was a lot better than trying to sculpt with Super Sculpey or some other polymer clay. That's not to say that you can't use polymer clay for miniatures. I've seen professional sculptors who work exclusively with polymer clay, who specialize in sculpting miniatures. But just for me, the polymer clay wasn't working. So, tried this out, and this stuff did the trick. In particular, I'm talking about the green stuff sculpting putty, which is this stuff here. So for those of you who never used a sculpting putty before, sculpting putties, they come in two parts. You have a resin and a hardener, and you simply mix these two parts together, and as soon as you do, they begin to harden or to cure. Typically you're going to have about anywhere from half an hour to an hour before it gets too hard to work with, and that is of course if you've mixed your resin and your hardener in equal proportions. You can mix them differently to affect that curing time to be either quicker or slower. Another factor that affects how fast putties will harden is the temperature. So if you sculpted something, for example, and you wanted it to harden a lot faster, you could apply a gentle heat to it, and it would cure a lot quicker. Wargamers are really familiar with doing this. What they do is they use a tin can and a light bulb, and not one of the energy saving light bulbs, by the way, but like a regular incandescent bulb, and they create like what's called a green stuff or a putty oven, and this basically allows them to increase their cure time, or rather decrease the cure time, so that the putty hardens a lot quicker. There are lots of different putties out there on the market. I've put a few of them up here so you can look at them. Milliput, and they have a range of putties in different colors and in different I guess you could say textures. Then you've got Procreate. I've already pointed the green stuff out to you. The company who who created green stuff is a company called Knead-A-Tight, and they actually have another one which is harder to find, which is called brown stuff. You can see the two different parts of the putty there. And then there's also another one which I've never used before called Magic Sculpt. So those are like the main sculpting putties that are being used by sculptors at the moment, as far as I'm aware. Sculpting putty presents different challenges. It also presents different advantages, and has different potential to, say, mineral clays or polymer clays. One thing that I found a challenge whenever I started using putty was the fact that it's quite tacky, so it wants to stick. This can be something that's an advantage because obviously when you're adding green stuff to an existing sculpture, you want the sculpting compound to stick and adhere well. But it presents a challenge whenever the green stuff or whatever putty you're using wants to stick to your tools. So to get around this, you would want to be using some type of lubricant, and what most people tend to use is petroleum jelly. So you want to have a tub of petroleum jelly, and you simply just dip your tools in it and start sculpting. So we start off with our grain stuff, and I'm just going to cut the middle out. The reason why I do that is because where the two parts meet, they've already started to react to each other. So you just get rid of those for good measure, otherwise you could end up with like lumps. And then you just knead them together until it turns nice and green. So another nice thing about using a polymer clay, you don't have to prepare it really. Well, I mean, saying that, you do tend to knead it a bit before you start working with it just to soften it up, but it's nothing like this. It has been recommended to use gloves, to wear gloves whenever you're handling this stuff, but of all the people who I've seen use it, professional sculptors and whatnot, I don't think I've ever seen anybody wearing actual gloves, because it's so tacky. I can't imagine that that would be practical. So just get it kneaded, and then when you finish working, you should always wash your hands and your work surface. So there's your grain stuff, and I think that's pretty well mixed. Just want to make sure there's no like visible like blue or yellow still in there. Usually whenever you sculpt with sculpting putty, it's an additive process. So this means that you're adding just the amount of putty that you need to create the feature that you're going to make, and then shaping it instead of adding a larger bulk and then carving it away and removing your sculpting medium. So usually roll out the putty and then slice from the roll however much I need to make whatever it is I'm making. I can then begin shaping it in hand, like I may roll it into a ball depending on what the features I'm making. For this particular feature, I'm leaving it as a roll, and I just need to apply it to one of the armor plates. Rolling it out just ensures that you have equal amounts of putty. So once you've applied your putty that you're going to be sculpting, you can usually roughly shape with your fingers. It really just depends on the scale. Obviously, working at a miniature scale, which could be anything from like 23 mil or 32 mil or even 54 mil figures, it's very difficult to make anything using your fingers. But this is a larger scale subject, so I can do some rough shaping with my fingers. And then I move on to using sculpting tools. The tools that I use for sculpting putty are the same tools that I use whenever I'm sculpting using polymer clay. The only exception would be I don't use ribbon tools whenever I'm sculpting with putty, and that's because putty is not suitable for cutting with a ribbon tool. So for this particular feature, I'm just trying to ensure that there's some symmetry, because if there's not symmetry on the feature, it's going to be obvious. And that's the tool that I'm using there at the moment, and I'm putting it in this petroleum jelly. I don't want too much on there, just enough to coat the tool. And you want to reapply it, you know, fairly often to make sure that tools are nice and lubricated, because you want them to slide over the surface. And obviously displacing the putty is just a matter of applying pressure and varying pressure. So that's just basically how you're going to be sculpting using putty. I'm not going to show you the entire sculpting process for this because it's not necessary. Hopefully that's been informative.